characters. So I'm going to have to hit him up later to remind me who he is.
I got cut out of the movie, which really pissed me off.
Next, I would really love to hear from Barbara Fradkin. I'm reading everybody's books here, but lately I can't put Barbara's down. I started one, now on book 5. And I'd love to hear what Barbara has to say.
Does that work? Good. Thanks, Randy, and thank you to all of you for coming, and to When Words Collide for giving me this great honor. I mean, that sounds like a cliche, but to be honest, we authors, as James said, we really need you readers and you supporters, and we often toil on book tours all by ourselves without getting a whole lot of feedback from people or support in that experience. So, listening to all the other speakers before, my mind is going off in a million different directions with the things that they had to say. Thanks, James, for your support of Canadian writers and for being a publisher willing to tell our stories. Black Stallion, does that ever take me back? I was a horse crazy kid too, and I read every single one of those books and every other book I could get my hands on about horses. I'm the mystery writer among you guys, so I write an Inspector Green series that's actually set in Ottawa. Don't hold that against me. The city is a whole lot better than what you hear on the 11 o'clock news when you turn it on. Ottawa did this and Ottawa did that. It's also a city of 1 million people with 3 rivers, a lake, and a canal. Many different cultures, lots of places to create conflict and layers and texture and interesting things. And so I've set my series of detective novels in Ottawa. I'm also a retired child psychologist, and I've often been asked the question, what is a nice, gentle child psychologist, a healer of souls, doing plotting murder? I can tell you it's not such a stretch, actually. Psychologists have to be really patient and helpful and good-tempered. They have to listen and try to understand and build bridges between people. We can never express our frustration. We can never tell somebody they're full of it. We can never call them liars. Even when you want to leap across the room and kick somebody, you got to sit back and say, tell me your story. This allows for quite a buildup of frustration over the years, I can tell you. And so, at some point I discovered murder was an excellent therapy. And a whole lot cheaper than going to one of my colleagues, I can tell you. People have been talking about how they got into this business. I grew up in a house full of books. Absolutely had every single wall was lined floor to ceiling with books. My father was a book addict. He was a philosophy professor, and he bought every book that was ever published, I think. We didn't always have food, but we had more books. And they weren't in any particular order. If they were in order, I didn't know what it was. But I used to wander through the shelves when I was bored, and I would pull books at random and open them up and read little bits to see if they were interesting. So I read weird things when I was really young. I tackled the Russian novelists when I was about 10. I tackled Faulkner and Fitzgerald, and all kinds of people. I didn't, except for the horse stories, which I got at the library. All the stuff in my own house was high highfalutin stuff. There's also a whole lot of philosophy and history books, but I quickly put those away. It was the stories about character that really interested me. And when I was about 6, I started to write. I was always a daydreamer. I think people who are writers are often daydreamers. As little kids, sit in the back of school, hope the teacher doesn't notice that you're not listening to a word. But you're off in your own little adventure with your imaginary playmates. So as soon as I could, I wrote those things down. As soon as I could spell well enough, I started writing little stories. I wrote stories all the way through my life, every kind of story. Television scripts, short stories, 30 pages of about 25 novels. And at some point I actually finished a novel, and then I finished another one, another one, another one. But I never thought of publishing them, thank God, because they were dreadful. They were mainstream. The novels I started to write were mainstream, what do you call them? Rite of passage type stories. A young girl grows up, falls in love, is heartbroken, etc., etc. And they were dreadful. But they were my creative outlet. And I just used them for that. I just loved to tell stories. They were always in my head, and I always wrote them down. However, I had to earn a living, and that wasn't going to do it, so I studied and became a psychologist along the way. And when I was doing my doctoral thesis is when I discovered murder as a cathartic genre. Anybody who's ever written any academic work knows how extraordinarily dry and dull it is, particularly scientific theses. You're not allowed a single anecdotal comment, sense of humor, personal observation, nothing. So, but I had a kind of a fun thesis topic, actually, believe it or not, and not usually very entertaining. But so I would try to put a few funny stories into my discussion, knowing this wasn't going to fly, but worth a try. My thesis advisor, who was a man, of course, would knock them all out, and he'd write in the margin, "This is not appropriate for an academic's dissertation." After about the 25th of these things, he gave up on writing "This is not appropriate." He just put a sad face in the margin. I thought, this is really frustrating. This is not helping my sense of getting any, the frustration was just building up. So, by the time I started writing a murder mystery. I thought it would be fun, to be honest. I thought, you know, I read Agatha Christie as a kid, and I watched Perry Mason, and read all the usual oldies. And I thought it might be fun to write this kind of puzzle mystery. And eventually, my first Inspector Green novel was born. Took 10 years to actually write the thing. But that happens when you don't have a deadline looming over you, and nobody's saying, "We want your book." It was an academic mystery set in the University of Ottawa. Surprise, that's where I got my doctorate. And having just spent 8 years there, I was ready to kill somebody, and lo and behold, I did. So Do or Die is about power and passion and politics in the university setting. But in the process, and I went on and began to work. I had worked before, and I'd worked throughout this. I took the sort of slow boat through the PhD program. I don't know, many people do. 9 years from beginning to end of it. But I was working during that time too. But once I got out working, I really began to think seriously about mysteries. Because what I discovered in the process was that murder is not funny to me. Murder is a wonderful way to look at character. A murder mystery. It's a dramatic device, in fact, a literary device, to allow the writer to look at people when they're desperate, to study relationships and conflicts and inner struggle, to study social and moral issues that trouble you. It just became, wow, what a wonderful canvas on which to develop ideas and examine issues like that. And so that became my more important reason that I loved writing mysteries, besides being able to line up all the people that annoyed me and bump them off in the book. Or worse, what I used to do is sick my inspector on them. So I couldn't tell somebody they were a liar because I was a nice, helpful psychologist, but my inspector didn't have to have any qualms like that. So I just let him loose on a character I didn't like, and he could haul him over the coals. So, but what I did discover, I mean, one of the things that I think any of us at work, especially with children, society has so many barriers for children, so many struggles they have to overcome, so many things that are not their fault, they're just victims of, and even their families too. You sort of see a lot of the underdogs in society when you're working in school psychology like that. It's a very much of a frontline type of a job, and so you see issues of children that are struggling to learn and failing in school. You see issues of children who are sexually abused, physically abused, neglected, confused. You see families struggling, immigrant families struggling, people struggling with mental illness, a lot of different normal issues that people struggle with. And as a psychologist, I couldn't fix any of this for them. I could only just kind of hold their hand in a way and try to find little ways that we could make things softer for them. But the issues, the social issues and the society's problems are way bigger than one lonely psychologist overworked in a school board can do. But I discovered that if I could do those things in a book, that it let me get my ideas and my emotions out about it, and it also let me shine a light on it for the world to see. So every one of my books, in a way, this sounds really hokey, but looks at a different issue that has bothered me or troubled me over the years. So the first one, obviously, academics, that was easy. But the second one, I went back to the Holocaust, because my late husband had been a war crimes prosecutor, and he and I had had long talks about the struggles of survivors and the children of survivors. So I looked at that whole issue of present day surviving something like that. How do you get on with your life? What do you do when 60 years later somebody wants to, you encounter the individual that put you in a camp in the first place? And the third one, I went to child sexual abuse in a school, different kinds of issues like that. Post-traumatic stress disorder among our peacekeepers. Issues that I think, you read about in the news, but what the beauty of books, fiction books, is that we get to tell the story of the people beneath the little snippet in the news. How child sexual abuse, an allegation, how it ricochets through a community, through the school, through the teachers, through the other kids, through the parents, through the person who's accused, through the cops, through the social workers. Everybody is impacted and in a turmoil and in a conflict. And it was really interesting. I watched it several times over the course of my, but most of us just think in black and white terms because the issues haven't been elucidated for us. So that's kind of one of my joys of writing, is to hope that I put the problems out on the table. I don't give answers, because sometimes there aren't really answers. There's just awareness and maybe a little bit more compassion and a little bit more understanding. And I hope at the end of a book that people have a sense of, what would I do in this situation? And there, but for the grace of God, go I. And if I succeeded in doing that, then I think I've done a good job. Thank you.